The forest was so still that night, it felt as if even the crickets had been silenced. Our campfire flickered weakly, a dying beacon in the dark, its smoke curling into a sky crowded with stars. We had hiked for hours to get here, a remote clearing deep in the mountains, far from the hum of highways and glowing streetlights. It was supposed to be peaceful, an escape. But there was something about the way the wind hissed through the pines, something about the oppressive darkness pressing in from all sides, that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was the kind of silence that makes you feel watched. I remember the exact moment I felt it. I was sitting cross-legged on a folding chair, marshmallow skewer in hand, my best friend Dylan laughing about something stupid one of us had said earlier. Behind him, the trees formed an impenetrable wall, their trunks like tall black sentinels. I wasn't really listening to him anymore. My eyes had locked onto a single spot between two pines, a patch of shadow that seemed too still, too heavy. It wasn't moving like the rest of the forest. "Hey," I whispered, interrupting him mid-story. "Do you see that?" Dylan turned his head lazily, following my gaze. "What?" "There," I said, pointing with the skewer. "I swear there's something there." He squinted for a few seconds, then chuckled. "Dude, it's just a tree. Stop freaking yourself out." But I couldn't shake it. My pulse thudded in my ears as I stared into the darkness, certain I could see the faint outline of a head, round and pale, peeking from behind a tree trunk. It wasn't moving. It was just there, watching. I stood up so fast my chair toppled over. Dylan sighed and grabbed a flashlight, shining it in the direction I was pointing. The beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating only more trees, more branches swaying in the faint breeze. Nothing unusual. Still, I swore I'd seen something. "Happy now?" Dylan said, clicking the flashlight off. "You're just tired. Come on, sit down." I nodded reluctantly, forcing a laugh to hide how uneasy I felt. Maybe he was right. We'd hiked for hours with heavy packs, and exhaustion could make anyone see things. I told myself it was just my imagination. But deep down, I didn't believe it. The forest felt wrong. It felt like eyes were on us, even when Dylan went back to telling jokes and I tried to focus on the fire. The hours dragged by, the fire shrinking lower and lower until the clearing was mostly swallowed by darkness. We climbed into our sleeping bags, the thin nylon walls of the tent barely separating us from the night. Dylan fell asleep almost instantly, his breathing slow and steady. I, on the other hand, lay wide awake, staring at the sliver of moonlight cutting through the mesh window above me. That's when I heard it. A twig snapping. Soft, deliberate. I froze, straining to hear over Dylan's breathing. The sound came again, closer this time. Someone, or something, was walking through the woods just outside our tent. My heart hammered in my chest, and I reached over, shaking Dylan awake. "What?" he mumbled groggily. "Sure," I hissed. "Someone's out there." He blinked in confusion, but when we both heard the crunch of leaves just a few feet away, his expression changed. He grabbed his flashlight, flicking it on. The beam swept through the clearing outside, landing briefly on the edge of a tree. I thought I saw movement, just a flicker of white, maybe a face, maybe a shirt, but it was gone before I could be sure. "Probably a deer," Dylan whispered, though I could hear the doubt in his voice. We sat frozen in silence for what felt like hours, listening. The noises stopped, and eventually Dylan dozed back off, mumbling something about me overreacting. I couldn't sleep. Not with the way the forest seemed to hold its breath around us. I lay there with my eyes open, ears straining, every muscle in my body tense. And then, just as my eyelids started to grow heavy, I felt it. That unmistakable sensation of being watched. I turned my head toward the mesh window, and my breath caught in my throat. There, just beyond the thin fabric, was a face. Pale, gaunt, and utterly still. The man, or at least I thought it was a man, was standing less than 2 feet from me, staring through the window directly into my eyes. His face was so pale it almost glowed in the moonlight, and his lips were curled into the faintest, most unsettling smile I'd ever seen. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. My body locked up in sheer terror as I stared at him. His eyes were wide, unblinking, glistening in the faint light. He didn't speak. Didn't make a sound. He just stood there, motionless, watching me. Finally, I managed to whisper Dylan's name, my voice trembling. He stirred, groggy and annoyed, but when he saw my face, saw the fear etched into every inch of it, he sat up instantly. I pointed toward the window, but by the time he shone the flashlight that way, the man was gone. The beam swept across the clearing, revealing nothing but trees and shadows. "Okay, what the hell?" Dylan muttered, now wide awake. He grabbed the hatchet we'd brought for chopping firewood and unzipped the tent. "Stay here." "No," I hissed, grabbing his arm. "Are you insane? He's out there." "Exactly," Dylan whispered. "And I'm not letting some creep sneak around while we're sitting ducks." Before I could stop him, he stepped out into the clearing, flashlight beam cutting through the trees. My heart pounded as I scrambled to grab my own flashlight, fumbling with the zipper to follow him. The forest was eerily quiet, our own breathing loud in the silence. We searched for over an hour, circling the clearing, scanning every shadow and bush. Nothing. No sign of anyone. But I knew what I'd seen. That face was burned into my mind, the way he looked at me like I was prey. We eventually retreated back to the tent, barricading the zipper with our backpacks, though we knew it wouldn't do much good if someone really wanted in. Neither of us slept. We sat back to back, flashlights in hand, every little rustle in the underbrush making us flinch. At some point in the night, I heard soft footsteps again. Slow, deliberate crunches of leaves, circling the campsite. Dylan heard it too. He mouthed something I couldn't make out, and I pointed my flashlight toward the sound. That's when we both saw him. He was standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of the light. A tall, thin figure, motionless as a statue. His head was tilted slightly to one side, as though he was curious. I could barely make out his features, but I knew it was the same man. The same pale face. We froze, too terrified to move, too terrified to even speak. He didn't come closer. He just stood there, watching us. Minutes passed. Then, without warning, he turned and melted back into the darkness, silent as a shadow. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. The first hint of gray light in the sky felt like salvation. We packed our gear in record time, neither of us saying much. But just as we were about to leave, I felt something heavy in my chest, a gnawing dread that made me stop. "Wait," I said, scanning the clearing. "Where's the firewood?" Dylan frowned. "What?" "The firewood," I repeated. "We left it stacked by the tent." Sure enough, the neat pile of logs we'd gathered was gone. In its place, someone had arranged a strange pattern on the ground, small twigs and stones laid out in a crude symbol I didn't recognize. It looked like a circle with jagged lines through it, almost like a sunburst or an eye. A message, or a warning. Dylan swore under his breath, yanking his pack onto his shoulders. "We're leaving." "No." We practically ran back down the trail, hearts hammering, every snapping branch behind us making us jump. We didn't slow down until we were in the car, doors locked, engine roaring to life. Neither of us spoke on the drive back to town. What could we even say? There was no way to explain what had happened, no way to rationalize it. That night, as I lay in bed trying to convince myself it was over, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there. Watching. Waiting. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the last time I'd see his face. Sleep didn't come easy after that night in the woods. Every creak of my house settling, every gust of wind rattling against the windows, made me jump. It had been 2 days since Dylan and I had fled that campsite, but the memory of the pale man's face haunted me. He wasn't just some random hiker who'd stumbled across us in the woods. There was something deeply wrong about him. Something deliberate. I tried to convince myself it was just a creepy encounter gone too far, a strange story to tell someday. But that morning, when I looked out my bedroom window and saw footprints in the dew on my backyard grass, all of those reassurances crumbled. The footprints weren't mine. They led from the back gate, always locked, to just beneath my window, then disappeared back toward the trees that lined my yard. I didn't tell Dylan right away. He'd already been jumpy, texting me at all hours to ask if I'd seen or heard anything strange. He swore he'd been hearing footsteps outside his apartment too. At first, I thought he was just paranoid, like me. But those footprints, they were real. That night, I called him. "Dylan," I whispered, clutching the phone like someone might hear me through it. He was here. What do you mean? In my yard, I said, voice trembling. There were footprints leading up to my window. Silence filled the other end of the line. When Dylan finally spoke, his voice was low and serious. I think he followed us home. The words chilled me to the core. Followed us. That explained why I hadn't been able to shake the feeling of being watched, even in the safety of my own house. We need to tell someone, I said. The police, maybe. And say what? Dylan interrupted sharply. That we saw some guy in the woods and now we're paranoid? They'll think we're crazy. He was right. We didn't have a picture of him, or any proof beyond footprints that could belong to anyone. Come over, Dylan said finally. We'll figure this out. I hesitated but agreed. The thought of being alone in my house another night was unbearable. I grabbed my bag, locked every door behind me, and drove to Dylan's place. His apartment was on the second floor of a crumbling building on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it felt safer than my isolated house. We barricaded his door with chairs, turned off all the lights, and sat together on the couch with beers we barely touched. The unease hung heavy in the room. I can't get his face out of my head, I whispered, hugging my knees to my chest. That smile. It wasn't human. Dylan rubbed his eyes. I don't know what he wanted, but I don't think this is random. What do you mean? He hesitated. Remember that symbol? The one he left by the tent. I nodded. The crude circle with jagged lines still burned in my memory. I looked it up, Dylan said, his voice dropping lower. It's hard to find anything about it, but I found a forum post. It said it's a mark. Like a hunter's mark. A chill ran down my spine. What kind of hunter? I whispered. He met my eyes. Not the animal kind. Neither of us spoke for a long time after that. We left the lights off, keeping the curtains drawn tight, whispering in hushed voices like we might be overheard. The paranoia was suffocating. Every creak of the building, every distant bark of a dog outside, made my skin crawl. Dylan suggested we take shifts staying awake, just to be safe. He passed out around 3 a.m., but I stayed up, curled in a blanket on the couch, staring out the small gap in the curtains. The street outside was deserted, a single flickering lamp casting pale light on the pavement. And that's when I saw him. He was standing under the street lamp. The same pale face, the same unnerving stillness. His head tilted slightly, as if he knew I was watching. My breath hitched in my throat, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stood there, bathed in the sickly glow of the streetlight, watching Dylan's apartment. I shook Dylan awake, my voice trembling. He's here. Dylan, he's here. Dylan scrambled to the window, and his face went pale. Holy Jesus! We ducked below the sill, hearts pounding. Dylan grabbed his phone, fumbling to dial 911. Stay on the line, the dispatcher told him. An officer will be there soon. But by the time the flashing red and blue lights painted the apartment walls, the pale man was gone. The cops searched the street, the building, even the alley behind it. No sign of him. They told us to keep our doors locked and call again if he came back, but I could tell they didn't take us seriously. We barely slept. The adrenaline kept us awake until sunrise, when the fear gave way to exhaustion. I dozed off on the couch for maybe an hour before Dylan shook me awake. Look, he whispered, pointing at the window. On the outside of the glass, pressed flat against it, was a single handprint. It was smeared, as if he'd dragged his fingers slowly down the glass while we slept. We decided then and there we weren't staying in the apartment. We packed up essentials, shoved them into backpacks, and left town. Neither of us said it aloud, but I think we both believed the same thing. If he could find us here, he could find us anywhere. We drove for hours, heading toward a cabin Dylan's uncle owned up in the mountains. It wasn't much more than a shack, but it was far from the city, far from everything. Maybe we could lose him out there. But the deeper into the mountains we drove, the heavier the dread in my chest grew. Are we sure about this? I asked as the road narrowed into a gravel path lined with towering pines. Where else are we supposed to go? Dylan said, gripping the wheel tighter. If he's following us, maybe we can at least get the jump on him out here. The cabin sat at the end of a long, winding trail. The wood was weathered and gray, the windows caked with grime. It hadn't been used in years, but Dylan found the spare key under a loose rock by the door. Inside, the cabin smelled of dust and mildew. Cobwebs hung in the corners, and the only furniture was a sagging couch and a rusty wood stove. But at least there was a lock on the door. We spent the rest of the day boarding up the windows and setting up makeshift alarms, strings with bells attached to empty cans, stretched across the doors and windows. It felt childish, but the effort gave us a shred of comfort. That night, we sat in silence, the only light coming from a single lantern on the table. The forest outside was alive with nocturnal sounds, but every crack of a branch made us jump. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Dylan was pacing near the door, while I sat on the couch, hugging my knees. "Do you hear that?" I whispered suddenly. He froze. There it was again, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like knuckles gently rapping against glass. We both turned toward the sound. It was coming from one of the boarded windows. Tap, tap, tap. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Dylan grabbed the hatchet, creeping toward the window. The tapping stopped. We held our breath, waiting. Then, from the opposite side of the cabin, tap, tap, tap. We spun around, staring at the window behind us. "He's playing with us," Dylan whispered. I didn't respond. My heart was beating so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Suddenly, the bells by the front door jingled violently, followed by a deafening slam. Someone, or something, was pounding on the door. The lantern flickered as if the whole cabin trembled under the force of it. "Get back!" Dylan shouted, yanking me toward the couch. The pounding stopped as abruptly as it started. Silence swallowed the cabin. Then came the laughter. It was soft at first, barely audible, but it grew louder, filling the cabin with a sound that made my blood run cold. It wasn't the kind of laughter you hear from someone amused. It was hollow, mocking. Dylan raised the hatchet, his hands trembling. "Leave us alone!" he shouted into the darkness. No response. Just that awful laughter fading back into the forest. We stayed up the rest of the night, clutching our weapons, waiting for him to return. But he didn't. When morning came, we cautiously stepped outside. The clearing around the cabin was empty, but something was carved into the dirt path leading up to it. The same symbol we'd seen at the campsite. Only this time, there was something new, a small, crude drawing next to it. 2 stick figures. And above them, a tall figure with hollow circles for eyes. The drawing in the dirt felt like a threat carved straight into our nerves. Dylan crouched to study it, but I couldn't bring myself to get closer. The stick figures were crudely drawn, but there was no mistaking who they represented. The 2 shorter figures side by side were us. And towering over them was a tall figure with wide, hollow eyes, just like his. "He knows we're here," Dylan whispered, his voice barely audible. "He knows everything." I scanned the tree line, half expecting him to be watching us even now. Every shadow between the pines seemed to shift when I stared too long. The forest was alive in a way that didn't feel natural, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. "We should leave," I said, hugging myself as a gust of cold mountain air swept through the clearing. "And go where?" Dylan snapped. "Back home. He found us there. He'll just keep following." The anger in his voice wasn't aimed at me, but I flinched anyway. I knew he was scared, terrified, actually. So was I. We wiped away the drawing, though it felt like a futile gesture, and spent the rest of the morning double-checking our makeshift alarms. Dylan set up fishing line at knee level, threading more bells and cans along the perimeter. I gathered firewood, though my eyes kept darting toward the trees, scanning for any sign of movement. Every time I thought I saw a shadow shift or heard a twig snap, I froze, heart pounding. By afternoon, we decided to stay inside. The cabin wasn't much protection, but at least there was only one door, and we boarded every window from the inside. We sat at the table, eating canned soup in silence, both of us too tense to really taste it. "He's not human," Dylan said suddenly, breaking the quiet. I looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" He stared at the table, jaw tight. "No one moves like that. No one finds you like that. He didn't just see us camping. He was waiting for us." A chill ran down my spine. "You think he hunts people?" I whispered. Dylan didn't answer. He didn't have to. The day dragged on with agonizing slowness. By sunset, the forest outside had gone quiet again. That same suffocating stillness we'd felt at the campsite crept over the clearing, like the woods themselves were holding back, watching. We lit a single lantern and sat on the floor, backs against the wall. Dylan gripped the hatchet like it was an extension of his arm, while I clutched the hunting knife we'd found in the cabin's old supplies. We didn't talk much. Every sound outside, the rustle of leaves, the occasional crack of a branch, made us stiffen. Sometime after midnight, I heard the bells. Just one soft jingle from the front door. We both froze, staring at each other with wide eyes. Then another jingle. And another. The line of bells shook violently, and the doorknob rattled. Something scraped against the wood, like claws dragging slowly down the surface. My breath caught in my throat as I grabbed Dylan's arm. "He's here." The laughter started again. That same hollow, mocking laugh that didn't sound fully human. It drifted around the cabin, echoing in the darkness, making it impossible to tell where it was coming from. Then, silence. We sat there for what felt like hours, every muscle in my body locked tight. Dylan whispered for me to stay quiet, his eyes fixed on the door. A faint scratching sound started next. Not at the door, but along the back wall of the cabin. Like nails dragging across wood. Slowly. Deliberately. I wanted to scream, but I bit down hard on my lip, tasting blood. Dylan mouthed something I couldn't make out, then motioned for me to follow him. We crawled toward the back of the cabin, where the sound was loudest. Dylan pressed his ear against the wall, then recoiled like he'd been burned. I grabbed his sleeve, mouthing, "What?" "He's whispering," Dylan mouthed back, his eyes wide with horror. I strained to listen. At first, I heard nothing but the sound of my own heartbeat. Then, faintly, I caught it, a voice, murmuring something in a language I didn't understand. The words were guttural, almost animalistic, but with a rhythm that felt purposeful, like chanting. Suddenly, a loud bang shook the wall, and I yelped, scrambling backward. Dylan grabbed my wrist, pulling me toward the table where the lantern flickered violently. The bells by the front door jingled again, followed by another deafening slam. The whole cabin shook. "He's trying to get in," I whispered, panicked. Dylan raised the hatchet, eyes wild. "Stay behind me." We waited, hearts pounding, but no one came crashing through the door. Instead, the banging stopped, replaced by footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps circling the cabin. We followed the sound, turning our heads in unison as the footsteps moved from one side to the other, never stopping, never faltering. Then, everything went quiet. Dylan motioned for me to grab my bag, whispering, "We can't stay here." I hesitated, but I knew he was right. This cabin wasn't safe anymore. We packed in silence, stuffing our things into our bags as quietly as possible. Dylan motioned for me to follow him to the back window. We'd nailed plywood over it earlier, but Dylan pried it off slowly, wincing with every creak of the wood. The window opened to a slope leading down to the forest. It was risky, but we didn't have a choice. Dylan climbed out first, reaching back to help me. The forest air was freezing, sharp in my lungs. The moon barely illuminated the path, but we moved quickly, crouched low, trying not to make noise. We made it about 20 feet from the cabin before I heard something that made my blood run cold. The laughter. It was close. Too close. "Run," Dylan hissed. We bolted through the woods, branches whipping at our faces, leaves crunching underfoot. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear him. His footsteps were impossibly fast, crashing through the forest like some predator built for the hunt. We stumbled onto a narrow deer trail, sprinting as hard as we could. My lungs burned, and my legs screamed, but I didn't stop. Then Dylan shouted. I turned just in time to see him trip over a fallen log, hitting the ground hard. I skidded to a stop, scrambling to help him up, but before I could reach him, I saw movement in the trees. He was there. The pale man stood just beyond the tree line, tall and gaunt, his face illuminated by the moon. His eyes locked onto mine, and I froze. There was no expression, no anger or malice, just that same hollow curiosity, like a predator observing its prey. "Get up!" I screamed, grabbing Dylan's arm and hauling him to his feet. We ran again, blindly crashing through the forest. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I didn't know where we were going, only that we had to keep moving. After what felt like hours, we stumbled into another clearing. A small stream cut through the middle, glistening faintly in the moonlight. Dylan collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. "We can't stop," I panted, scanning the tree-line. "He's still out there." I can't," Dylan gasped, clutching his side. I grabbed his face, forcing him to look at me. "Dylan, if we stop, we're dead." He nodded weakly, and we stumbled onward, following the stream. The forest felt alive around us, every sound amplified, the rustle of leaves, the hoot of an owl, the distant snap of a twig. And then I heard it again. The chanting. It was faint, but unmistakable. That same guttural, rhythmic murmur we'd heard at the cabin. "Do you hear that?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Dylan nodded, his eyes wide. We followed the stream until the chanting grew louder. Then we saw it. A clearing ahead, illuminated by the glow of a dozen small fires. We crouched behind a tree, peering into the clearing. There were symbols carved into the ground, dozens of them, just like the one from the campsite. At the center of the clearing stood the pale man, his back to us. He was shirtless, his spine jutting out like a row of knives. His arms were raised, and he was chanting in that guttural language. Around him, hanging from the trees, were dozens of things. At first, I thought they were bags. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized they were animal carcasses. Rabbits, birds, even deer, all gutted and hung by their necks. Blood dripped onto the symbols carved below them. I clapped a hand over my mouth to stop a scream. Dylan grabbed my wrist, eyes wide with terror. "We need to go," he mouthed. But as I turned to leave, a twig snapped beneath my foot. The chanting stopped. The pale man's head turned slowly, unnaturally, until his hollow eyes locked onto us. And then he smiled. The smile he gave us wasn't human. It was too wide, too deliberate, stretching across his gaunt face as though it had been carved there. My stomach churned, and every instinct screamed at me to run. "Go!" Dylan hissed, his voice breaking. We turned and bolted into the darkness, crashing through brush and tree limbs like hunted animals. Behind us, I heard movement, a rustle that didn't sound like a single man running, but something faster, heavier, tearing through the forest. The chanting had stopped, replaced by that guttural laughter. It was closer now. Branches clawed at my arms and face as I sprinted, Dylan just ahead of me. My chest burned, and my legs felt like lead, but adrenaline pushed me forward. Every time I thought we'd gained some distance, that awful laughter echoed behind us, closer than before, like he was playing with us, letting us think we had a chance. Dylan skidded to a stop so suddenly I almost barreled into him. "Why are you stopping?" I gasped. He pointed ahead. Through the thick trees, barely visible in the moonlight, was an old fire tower. It loomed over the forest like a skeleton, rusted metal stairs spiraling upward. "We can get up there," Dylan panted. "We'll have the high ground, he can't sneak up on us." I wanted to tell him it was a bad idea, that we'd be cornering ourselves, but I couldn't think of anything better. We sprinted for the tower, our footsteps echoing on the wooden platform as we started to climb. The structure groaned under our weight, but we didn't stop. Step after step, breath ragged, hearts pounding, until we reached the top platform. The wind was sharp and cold, cutting through my sweat-soaked clothes. From up here, we could see the forest stretched out endlessly beneath us, a dark ocean of trees. For a moment, there was silence. "Do you think we lost him?" I whispered. Dylan shook his head, his eyes scanning the treetops. "No. He's here. I know he is." We crouched low, trying to stay out of sight. I gripped the railing, my fingers trembling so hard they hurt. Every shadow between the trees below looked like him, every whisper of wind like footsteps. Then I heard it. The creak of a step on the tower stairs. Dylan and I exchanged a look, pure terror mirrored in his eyes. Another creak. And another. He was climbing. "Stay behind me," Dylan whispered, gripping the hatchet so tightly his knuckles turned white. We crouched near the entrance to the platform, staring at the narrow stairs. The creaking grew louder, closer, until I saw movement, a pale hand curling around the railing. I couldn't breathe. The pale man's face appeared in the moonlight, tilted at that unnatural angle, his wide eyes locked onto us. He moved slowly, deliberately, each step calculated, savoring our fear. Dylan raised the hatchet, but I grabbed his arm. "Wait, don't get too close to him." The man's grin widened. He let go of the railing with one hand, extending it toward us like he wanted to touch us. Dylan swung. The hatchet sliced through the air, but the man jerked back just in time, his movements eerily fast. He lunged upward, grabbing the railing with inhuman strength, and hauled himself onto the platform in a single motion. Dylan swung again, but the man grabbed his wrist mid-swing, twisting his arm with a sickening crack. Dylan screamed, dropping the hatchet. "Run!" Dylan shouted through gritted teeth. I scrambled backward, but there was nowhere to go. The platform was small, boxed in by a waist-high railing. The pale man's attention shifted to me. His eyes were wrong. They weren't just staring at me, they were inside me, like he could see every fear I'd ever had. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Dylan kicked him, sending him staggering back against the railing. For a brief second, the man was off balance. "Push him!" Dylan screamed. I ran forward, adrenaline taking over, and slammed my shoulder into him. He teetered backward, arms flailing, and for a moment I thought he would fall. But at the last second, his hand shot out and grabbed the railing. His strength was unbelievable. He swung himself back onto the platform like it was nothing. Dylan grabbed my arm, dragging me toward the ladder. "We have to go." We scrambled down the stairs as fast as we could, the metal groaning beneath us. Behind us, the pale man's laughter echoed, low and guttural. He wasn't rushing to catch us. He didn't need to. He knew we weren't escaping him. We hit the ground and bolted into the trees, running until our lungs burned and our legs threatened to give out. I don't know how long we ran, but when we finally stopped, the tower was far behind us. Dylan leaned against a tree, clutching his broken arm, his face pale. We can't keep doing this," he panted. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. "We have to find help. A ranger station, something." Dylan nodded weakly. We decided to follow the stream again, hoping it would lead us to civilization, or at least somewhere safer than this nightmare. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hurting us. That every step we took was part of some plan he'd already made. The thought made my skin crawl. Hours passed. The forest grew darker, denser. We were exhausted, starving, and freezing, but we didn't dare stop for long. Dylan's arm was swelling badly, and he winced with every step. Then, through the trees, I saw something that made my heart leap. A cabin. But not like the one we'd left behind. This one was smaller, older, its roof sagging, windows shattered. It looked abandoned, but at that moment, even 4 walls and a roof felt like salvation. "Come on," I said, helping Dylan toward it. The door was hanging crookedly from its hinges, but it opened with a push. Inside, the cabin smelled of rot and mold. The floorboards creaked under our weight, and cobwebs hung like curtains from the ceiling. "This place gives me the creeps," Dylan muttered. "Do we have a choice?" I whispered. We sat in the corner, away from the broken windows, trying to catch our breath. I dug through my bag for water and handed Dylan a bottle. That's when I saw it. On the far wall of the cabin, etched deep into the wood, was the same symbol. The jagged circle. And beneath it, words carved in shaky letters. "He does not stop." A chill ran through me. This wasn't a random cabin. Someone had been here before us, someone who knew about him. Dylan followed my gaze, his face pale. "We need to get out of here." Before I could respond, a loud thud shook the cabin. We froze. Another thud. This time, closer. I grabbed Dylan's uninjured arm, pulling him toward the door, but it slammed shut before we could reach it. The hinges groaned as if some invisible force was holding it shut. Then the laughter started again. It surrounded us, filling the cabin. Dylan grabbed the hatchet with his good hand, backing us into a corner. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. A shadow moved across the broken window. He was outside, watching. I tightened my grip on the knife, forcing myself to stay calm. If he came through that door, I'd fight. I didn't care how strong he was. But he didn't come through the door. Instead, a voice spoke, low and raspy, right by my ear. "Run!" I screamed, spinning around, but no one was there. Dylan swung the hatchet wildly, but he hit nothing but air. The laughter intensified, echoing inside my skull. Then, without warning, the door flew open. We didn't wait to see him. We bolted out of the cabin, sprinting into the forest like our lives depended on it, because they did. I didn't dare look back, but I knew he was following. I could feel his presence, like ice water running down my spine. We ran until our legs gave out, collapsing in a small clearing. Dylan was pale, his breathing ragged. "We're not gonna make it," he whispered. "Yes, we are," I said, though I didn't believe it. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the dirt at the edge of the clearing, carved deep into the earth, was another symbol. And next to it, a fresh carving of 2 stick figures. Only this time, one of them was lying on the ground. The symbol in the dirt felt like a death sentence. My breath hitched as I stared at the crude drawing. The stick figure on the ground was unmistakable. Dylan. It had to be Dylan. "No," I whispered, backing away from it. "No, no, no." Dylan followed my gaze, his face pale and tight with pain. What is that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was too dry, my thoughts spinning. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't just hunting us. It was predicting us. Or worse, controlling us. Dylan swore under his breath, clutching his injured arm. "We need to keep moving. Sitting here is a death wish." He was right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that every step we took was exactly what it wanted. Like we were just pawns in some twisted game. Still, I forced myself to help Dylan up, and we stumbled back into the trees, following no path this time. Just running. Always running. The forest seemed to change around us as we moved. The trees grew denser, their branches tangling overhead like skeletal fingers. The moonlight that had guided us before was gone, swallowed by thick, unnatural darkness. Even the air felt heavier, as though we'd stepped into a different world entirely. "How long do you think we've been running?" Dylan asked, his voice hoarse. "I don't know," I said, glancing at my watch. The cracked screen blinked 3:17 a.m. Time feels weird. He didn't answer, just gritted his teeth and kept moving. His steps were slower now, heavier. He was losing blood. We stumbled into another clearing, this one dominated by a massive tree. It was ancient, its bark gnarled and blackened like it had been struck by lightning countless times. Symbols were carved into its trunk, dozens of them, all the same jagged circle we'd seen before. At the base of the tree was a pile of stones arranged in a perfect spiral. And in the center of the spiral, a skull. It was human. I gagged, stumbling back. Dylan's breathing quickened. This is some kind of shrine," he whispered. I grabbed his arm. "We need to go." But before we could take another step, a voice drifted through the clearing. "Stay." It was low, guttural, and came from everywhere at once. Dylan raised the hatchet with his good hand, spinning around, but there was nothing there. Then, from the shadows between the trees, he emerged. The pale man. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if he knew there was no point in rushing. His grin stretched impossibly wide, revealing too many teeth. "Don't," Dylan warned, his voice trembling. "Stay back." The man tilted his head, studying us like we were insects. Then he stepped forward, and Dylan swung. The hatchet struck his shoulder with a sickening thud. But he didn't flinch. He reached up and pulled the hatchet out of his own flesh, the wound sealing before my eyes. I froze in horror. Dylan staggered back, his weapon useless now. "Run," I whispered. But Dylan didn't move. He was staring at the man like a deer caught in headlights. "Dylan!" I screamed, grabbing his arm. That broke the spell. He stumbled after me as I sprinted into the woods, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. Behind us, the man didn't chase, he just laughed. That horrible, guttural laugh that echoed in my skull. It was worse than him running. It meant he knew he didn't have to. We crashed through the forest blindly, and that's when I saw it, an old trail marker nailed to a tree. Hope surged through me. "This way!" I shouted, pulling Dylan along the faint path. The trail twisted and turned, leading us uphill. My lungs burned, but I didn't stop until I saw a faint glow through the trees. A ranger station. The small cabin stood at the top of the hill, its porch light flickering. Relief washed over me so strongly I almost collapsed. We stumbled up the steps and pounded on the door. "Help!" I screamed. "Please, someone help us!" The door swung open, revealing a man in a ranger's uniform. He looked startled, but his expression softened when he saw Dylan's arm. "What happened to you two?" "There's someone in the woods," I gasped. "He's chasing us. Please, you have to call the police." The ranger frowned but stepped aside. "Come in. You're safe here." We practically fell into the cabin. The warmth inside was overwhelming, and for a moment I thought we'd made it. That we were finally safe. Then I saw the wall behind the ranger's desk. It was covered in photographs. Dozens of them. All of them of us. Dylan. Our campsite. The cabin we'd hidden in. The fire tower. Every step we'd taken tonight. My blood turned to ice. The ranger closed the door behind us, locking it with a heavy click. "You shouldn't have run so far," he said softly. "He doesn't like it when they run." I spun around, backing away from him. What are you talking about?" He smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "You've been chosen. It's an honor, really." Dylan groaned, leaning against the wall. "Chosen for what?" The ranger didn't answer. Instead, he walked to a large chest in the corner and opened it. Inside were ropes, chains, and masks made of animal skulls. My stomach lurched. "Stay away from us," I warned, grabbing the hatchet from Dylan's hand. The ranger chuckled. "You can't fight him. No one ever has." Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out. The cabin was plunged into darkness. Then came the laughter. Not from the ranger. From him. It was inside the cabin. I spun wildly, trying to see in the dark. "Dylan, we have to." Something cold and sharp wrapped around my ankle, yanking me off my feet. I hit the floor hard, my vision swimming. "Run!" Dylan shouted, swinging blindly in the dark. I heard a sickening crack, followed by Dylan's scream. I crawled toward him, but a hand grabbed my hair, pulling me back. I screamed, thrashing and kicking, but it was like fighting stone. The ranger lit a lantern, its dim glow illuminating the nightmare around us. The pale man was crouched over Dylan, his long fingers wrapped around Dylan's throat. Dylan's face was turning purple as he struggled. "Stop!" I screamed, throwing the hatchet with all my strength. It struck the man in the back of the head, but he didn't even flinch. Instead, he slowly turned his head toward me, his grin impossibly wide. The ranger knelt beside me, holding me down. "Don't fight it," he whispered. "It'll be over soon." But I didn't stop fighting. I kicked and clawed, screaming for Dylan. Then there was silence. I froze. The pale man stood up, letting Dylan's lifeless body fall to the floor. "No," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "No, please." The man crouched in front of me, his cold, dead eyes locking onto mine. He tilted his head, studying me like I was something to be dissected. Then he leaned close, his breath cold against my ear. "You're next," I screamed, thrashing against the ranger's grip, but the man's hands closed around my throat. My vision blurred, darkness creeping in at the edges. The last thing I saw before everything went black was his face. Grinning, always grinning. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the forest floor. The sun was rising, casting golden light through the trees. For a moment, I thought it had been a nightmare. But then I sat up and saw Dylan's body lying beside me, eyes wide and lifeless. I screamed until my throat was raw. Then I saw it. In the dirt next to Dylan's body was another carving. This time, there was only one stick figure left standing. A shadow moved between the trees. And then I heard it. That laugh.